introduce our next speaker, which is Assistant Chief Constable Claire Bell, who started her policing career with the West Midlands Police in April 1996, and she spent the early years of her service in Birmingham, working predominantly in uniform. During her probation, she became a specially trained officer in rape and sexual offences and continued to work with rape victims until being promoted to Inspector in 2002. So without further ado, please welcome and introduce Assistant Chief Constable Claire Bell.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I certainly haven't left my notes at home because I'm not such an accomplished speaker as everyone who's come before me, so I am feeling incredibly nervous after the great speakers that we've had. But I am delighted and honoured to not only have attended this morning, but also to be able to speak for a short time, just about from a policing perspective. So can I start by saying that I absolutely applaud the mission statement of Sikh Women's Aid to empower victims to take control of their lives and to become survivors. So we know that it's incredibly difficult for any victim of domestic abuse or war crime to do this. But as we've heard, it can be even more challenging if there are cultural practices or expectations, language barriers or a lack of support. So we recognise in our work with all victims of such crime, but particularly the experiences of women and girls, that they can be impacted on by multiple factors, including ethnicity, sexuality, and for many women and girls that present to the police as offenders, that they can also be victims of domestic abuse and vogue. Whilst we do already, and we must continue to work across policing and indeed across the systems to recognise this and understand better, and then act on it, by tailoring services and responses to the needs of our victims and survivors. In order to develop positive relationships with members of the community, we recognise as the police that we must first earn the trust of all of our communities. The harrowing prevalence of domestic abuse, child abuse and sexual abuse within societies echo throughout the Sikh communities we've heard today. With the help of West Midlands Police Sikh Association, we're striving to build and maintain trust and confidence and ensure specialist support that meets the needs of all within the Sikh community. We recognise that we will never adequately serve our community in line with our force vision unless we understand perceptions and advocate culturally sensitive intervention strategies, as we've heard about today, for victims of crime, but particularly for women and girls. And I'll come back and end on this important point. So I want to talk a little bit about policing and violence against women and girls and where we are currently. I'll touch on both Sarah Everard and the COVID pandemic and a little on what we're doing in West Midlands Police. We can no longer talk about vogue within policing without acknowledging just how much Sarah Everard's murderous actions have deeply shaken trust in policing and left women doubting us. As an officer who spent most of her service advocating and striving to improve our service to vulnerable people, victims of domestic abuse, child abuse and sexual offences, it's mortifying to see the devastating effect that one case can have on the confidence in policing. But this is bigger than one man and bigger than one case, and we do know that. So whilst this truly terrible case has raised critical issues for the whole of policing that need to be examined and acted on, from vetting to professional standards, to how predatory and misogynistic behaviour is challenged, it's right that these issues now be fully and independently considered in a public inquiry, and policing must and will support that inquiry in every way that we can. We cannot and are not waiting for the findings of this inquiry to begin rebuilding women's trust that police officers will protect and respect them. We must be honest with ourselves that misogynistic attitudes and behaviours that exist in society also exist in policing too. That matters so much because of the powers that we hold, and because our legitimacy is built on public confidence. So where do we go from here? Across policing, we need to act collectively to ensure that we do all that we can to prevent someone like Sarah Everard's murderer ever being in policing again. We commit to rebuilding the trust that has been so damaged. We make it clear that policing is for everyone and includes everyone. Everyone working in policing challenges behaviour that betrays our standards. And to bring it back to violence against women and girls, we do better at targeting the violent men who harm women and building the strongest cases that we can and have the best chances of getting to court. So as I've said, I've worked in this arena for many years, and for the first time I have seen policing collectively and proactively use the term violence against women and girls. We recognise that the public want things called out for what they are, crimes that disproportionately affect women and are disproportionately perpetrated against by men should be called out and tackled as such. Whilst we cannot police our way out of VOG, and we understand it's a societal problem that needs a societal response, we as the police should and will play our part in tackling this problem. As the police, we have a major role to play in making women and girls feel safe, feel confident to report, prevent harm and bring offenders to justice. But we can also play a part in influencing what society is prepared to allow as acceptable behaviour. We have an opportunity to ensure that we tackle the issues in a way that makes it clear this type of behaviour is abhorrent and it is not an accepted social norm. So we absolutely understand that we need to work with partners to improve the system response to VOG, but as the VOG lead in West Midlands Police, I also believe it's vitally important that the police, in my case West Midlands Police, take responsibility for making our own improvements at the same time. As such, West Midlands Police have launched our own strategy to tackle violence against women and girls. The strategy doesn't attempt to encompass the whole VOG landscape, but rather it focuses on the area or on the areas that either have had limited attention to date or those that require an improved coordination. Areas such as domestic abuse remain a force priority and have done for many years, and the significant work to prevent, protect and bring justice for those affected continues under our robust existing arrangements. Our need to improve our criminal justice outcomes for victims of domestic abuse, however, does feature in the strategy, as it's an area that we recognise the need for improvement and greater coordination with the courts and the Crown Prosecution Service, especially post the pandemic. Next slide, please. We're on the right one. So, what's our ambition? Our ambition is to make the West Midlands Police a place where women and girls can live, work, study, socialise and travel safely and confidently, free of fear, violence and harassment. We understand the voice of women and girls and of men and boys and have a deep understanding of offender behaviour. This enables us to prevent harm, protect the vulnerable and effectively disrupt and pursue offenders. We achieve this with the public and with our partners. Next slide, please. So in seeking to deliver our ambition, we've laid out our key principles. Violence, abuse and intimidation against women and girls in any form is not acceptable and will not be tolerated, and this includes against our own staff. Every public space and education establishment should be a safe place for all women and girls. Women and girls should feel confident to report their experiences of harm to the police directly or indirectly, safe in the knowledge that they will be taken seriously and will be treated with dignity and respect. This includes when women and girls present to police as offenders. The lived experience of women and girls will be heard and their opinions respected. We expect the highest standards of professional behaviour from all of our staff, and we recognise that the small minority of cases where staff abuse their position of power for sexual and emotional gain, and we will ensure internal accountability and legitimacy. And finally, the involvement and engagement of men and boys in this work is vital. Next slide, please. So we'll deliver this through a focus on 7 priority areas. Each of these are led by a senior officer. I'm not going to go into lots of detail on this, but this is just to share what they are. So we have a focus on safety of public, our criminal justice response, which I've mentioned briefly, offender and suspect management, recording of crimes and incidents, which is still an ongoing debate, our behaviours, that is the behaviours of those that work in policing, being data and intelligence informed, and we've heard much about the importance of information in that form, engagement, insights and communication. And we will strive to make the improvements that our public deserve. Next slide, please. So I'll end with the scale of the issue and the impact of the pandemic. I'm never sure what statistics really mean sometimes, because there are so many out there, and they can be interpreted in so many different ways. So I've pulled out some stark facts and figures to illustrate the scale, issues and trends. 25% of women are affected by DA in their lifetime, which estimates that over 1 million women suffering domestic abuse every year. 2 women are killed every week in England and Wales by a current or former partner, and this has remained constant over the past decade. Police in England and Wales recorded 55,696 rapes in 2020 to 2021. Only 3,539 progressed to the Crown Prosecution Service, leading to just 1,109 convictions. A recent UN report in the UK found that 97% of women aged 18 to 24 have been sexually harassed, with 96% not reporting the situation as they believed it would not change anything. We know from the government's VOG strategy that there is an increased prevalence of violence against women and girls amongst minority ethnic groups. For example, those identifying as being mixed ethnicity are more likely to be victims of domestic abuse than other ethnic groups. Those identifying as Black British are more likely to be victims of sexual assault, and those identifying as being of another ethnic group are more likely to be victims of stalking. During the pandemic, police recorded crime data showed an increase in reported offences of domestic abuse. This was certainly the case in West Midlands Police, but the reality is that police have recorded offences of domestic recorded offences of domestic abuse have gradually risen over recent years anyway, and so it can't be determined if this directly related to the pandemic. Locally in West Midlands Police, we know that much of the increase is due to the better recording by us, and some recent research we undertook shows that we now record at the levels that bring us in line with the national average and our most similar forces, suggesting that previously we had been both underreporting and or underrecording and or both. What has happened, however, is the increase in reporting and recording, coupled with the decreases in other areas of crime during the pandemic, such as burglary, robbery and vehicle crime, means that domestic abuse now makes up a higher proportion of our total recorded crime. For example, domestic abuse made up 15% of our total recorded crime in West Midlands Police pre the pandemic, and that's compared to 19% of crime now. Between April and November 2019, that's pre-pandemic, versus April and November 2021, so what we would describe as post-pandemic, domestic abuse has increased by 75%. Finally, and not a statistic but a point I make repeatedly to staff, that whilst as police, like many frontline staff, we attend incidents, domestic abuse isn't a one-off incident, it's someone's life, and it's the experiences of victims and survivors of domestic abuse through the pandemic, as at any time, are just as important. We certainly found clear links between the way services were affected by the pandemic and the likelihood of perpetrators having the opportunity to re-offend. This extends from policing and criminal justice challenges, such as the delays in court proceedings, key agencies having to adjust their approach, opening out of hours, text messages, helplines, conducting lower risk safeguarding through telephone lines, through to the most basic accommodation challenges. And what we did find was victim and perpetrators certainly did suffer as a result of restrictions and lockdown. So whilst the world has sped up for so many as we ease out of the pandemic, services continue to be overwhelmed by the demand levels we saw rise and sadly sustained during this period, all of whom we know are now battling the odds to stabilise again. And battling hard to see from events like today. It's however important to recognise how the pandemic has caused agencies, including West Midlands Police, to reflect improved practices where necessary. For example, the introduction of the early prevention and learning team attached to the American safeguarding teams within the police, who are dedicated now to Clare's Law and serial repeat high-risk victims. And this reflects our endeavour to bring about positive change for the future. So while statistics and data is really important, so are the lived experiences of victims and survivors for us to remain focused and informed on how we all adapt our services. Everyday sexual harassment, like many of our crimes, don't show in the crime statistics, as it hasn't been reported. But listening to the public, recognising perceptions, identifying barriers, and being culturally competent can enrich our understanding and therefore our response. Thank you.